Welcome to the Spot On Insurance Podcast, brought to you by Insurance Licensing Services of America, ILSA. This is Ted Tavares.
And this is Arlene Tavares coming to you from beautiful Puerto Rico. Today, we'll be taking a closer look at a topic that affects every single one of us.
But before we get started, don't forget to click on the subscribe button so you don't miss a single episode. And now here's our host, Doug Foresta.
Hello and welcome. This is Doug Foresta, and my guest today back is with me is Marsha Egan. And what we're exploring today is we're going to be exploring creativity in organizations, and of course specifically in insurance organizations. And we're going to talk about promoting a culture of creativity. And again, my guest is Marsha Egan. She is a professional coach and success strategist from the Egan Group. You can learn more about her at marshaegan.com. Marsha Egan, welcome back.
Nice to be with you.
Thank you so much. So people can find this article on your website, marshaegan.com, about promoting a culture of creativity. Today we're going to talk about 4 points that the article has goes into more points, but we're going to cover, for the sake of time, we're going to cover 4 of those today. The first of your points you talk about is engagement. Can you say more about the importance of engagement in promoting a culture of creativity and explain what you mean by that?
Sure. Let's just bottom line it with, I think most managers, supervisors, workers, everyone involved wants to see creativity. However, there are things that are done that squash it. And we can talk about that in a few minutes. But for the people in the organization to feel and to engage people, that's the word, in being creative, sometimes you kind of have to say it. And that is, instead of just saying, do your work every day the way you do it, you may want to set up situations or teams or meetings to talk about how can we be even more creative in the way we're handling the implementation of this new computer system, or how can it, so I believe that the leadership needs to engage people. That's why I talk about engagement. Otherwise, people left to do what they're doing will keep doing what they're doing.
Right.
So you actually need to decide to engage people in, you don't just go out and say, be more creative today, but you work with them and ask questions and say, well, how can we do this? Or what have you thought about that? Because I don't know about you, I worked in a very large organization, several large organizations for a long period of time. And whenever anybody asked me for my ideas, I had some. And I wasn't alone. It's when you aren't asked that the status quo remains the status quo.
So you've got to engage people.
I don't know if that answers your question.
So you've got to engage people in asking for their creativity and asking for their input, their creative input.
Oh yeah, and or asking a question and then listening to the answer can be very powerful.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a radical concept, right?
So it is. And I don't want to paint the picture of managers and leaders being selfish, selfless, or uncaring, but they have stuff they have to get done. And their focus, encouraging creativity, is an important but not urgent kind of thing.
Right.
The urgent thing is, the insurance department just called and we need to respond to this now. So the initiative to promote creativity sometimes gets put to the back burner. And it's not intentional. There's nothing sinister about it. But when you get so caught up in everything else that's going on, sometimes creativity does just naturally get squashed.
Let's talk about the next point, which is communication. Can you explain the role of communication in promoting creativity, and perhaps some examples of how leaders can, what leaders can do specifically to encourage that?
Well, I think we've touched on that just a little bit in the last point, because communication is everything. If you want to see more creativity in your organization, communicating about it, rewarding people who use creativity, asking the question, as I just mentioned, how can we do this better? What do you think will work the next time? Communication it's all around the manager, supervisor, leader who wants to see more creativity. It's kind of, I hate to say it, but so many times in management and leadership, they say, what's the most important thing? Communication. And what's the thing that's lacking the most in your organization? Communication. But
right.
everybody agrees that communication is important. So if you're looking to enhance, encourage, develop more creativity in your work group, in your organization, in your business, communicating about it, asking questions, rewarding people who use some creativity. I think we're going to get to a couple more points on this, but yes. When the creativity happens, there's a communication opportunity then as well.
Well, let's talk about that, because the next point I was going to ask you about was this idea of positive focus and enthusiasm. So that might be a good segue into that. Can you say more about that, about having a positive focus?
Yes, I love positive focus. People will repeat what is rewarded. And a positive focus, when someone goes out of their way and handles a customer creatively, and the boss says to the person and or the group, hey, Sally handled this in a very creative way, and I'd love to see more creative solutions, because this customer was really happy and came back and bought twice as much material as the last time he did as a result of her creativity. That in and of itself, it's like a positive reward. And the one thing that is really, really important here is if someone tries to be creative and it doesn't work, and they are called on the carpet for it, or it's ignored, or the reverse of a positive response, that person's not going to go out of their way ever again to have a creative solution. Okay. So one of the real key points here is when you're being creative, there are going to be some mistakes. There are going to be some things that don't work quite right. And the minute you point out the mistake, rather than, boy, I was really glad that you used some creative energy to solve this problem, that person usually, they learn to be compliant rather than creative.
If I'm that person's coworker, I'm going to watch that and say, boy, you know what? If that's what happened to them, I'm going to avoid being creative or taking risks, because I don't want to be in that situation myself.
Oh, exactly. And you have situations where the home office people will come in and say, we want your ideas. And people go, oh, they really want our ideas? Okay. I've seen this happen where they write down their ideas and they go to a meeting, and the home office people have great intentions, but they end up defending why their idea was better than the worker's idea. And the worker says, well, I'm not going to bring that up in front of the vice president ever again. And yeah, it's human nature to defend the way things are rather than to try new things. And that in and of itself kills creativity. So one of the things that, in addition to kind of a positive focus, it's kind of like, let's just recognize that when you're being creative, every now and then it's not going to go perfectly, but let's do it anyway.
Right.
And a great example is I grew up in the insurance industry, and we would have to write letters to insurance departments or write a letter to a customer. And the worst thing that a supervisor or a manager or I could do is to take the letter apart, and if that letter accomplished exactly what we were trying to do, but I thought different words should have been used or whatever, just let it go. I mean, if it's a misspelling, that's one thing. But if they say the same thing but not the way you said it, let it go, because they'll think, hey, next time, the boss just took everything that I wrote and used it. I better be more careful next time.
Right. So giving employees freedom, as long as the work is, as long as it's correct, like you said, if it's filled with misspellings, that's one thing. But if it's maybe not the way you would have worded it, but it's still fine, it still accomplishes it, giving people that freedom, like when you're asking them to be creative, give them the freedom to be creative is kind of what I hear there.
Yeah, I think you said it better than I did, Doug. Well, it's very true, because encouraging creativity is great. Encouraging a culture, which means everybody is encouraged and everybody rewards everybody else. It doesn't just come from the top. Then all of a sudden, you're going to be ahead of the game compared to your competitors, because chances are they're in this creativity squashing behavior that they don't realize they have either.
Right, exactly. Spot on Insurance is sponsored by ILSA, Insurance Licensing Services of America, America's premier insurance licensing experts. To learn more about ILSA and the services they provide, visit ilsainc.com. My last point for you that I want to pull out is about empowerment. Can you explain what empowerment is and how can leaders encourage empowerment? What specifically can they do?
Sure. Empowerment means letting go. And when workers feel like their creative idea is being accepted and used, then they will do it again. They will be more creative. This is where I use this football coaching analogy, and that is the coach never leaves the field, but the coach isn't playing the game.
Right.
So if you're encouraging people to be creative, yeah, let them be creative, but let's make sure it's within certain guidelines. Make sure that they're still playing on the field and that they are following the program that has been endorsed. The football coach doesn't practice all week long and then just go home and let them play the game. So as a leader or a manager, if you're wanting to see some creativity, some people can go way out there. So, and there's nothing wrong with that, as long as it's, sometimes the managers and leaders know more about the boundaries than the people who are being creative. And if you want your work group, your team, your business to get ahead, empowering people to try new things can be fun.
Right.
And it goes online. When I think about this, I think everybody thinks about Southwest Airlines, and every time I get on one of their flights, I don't know what those flight attendants are going to do that's going to be fun, but I know it's going to be
they're going to do something
interesting and different.
Right. They're going to do something, and
exactly.
And they're empowered. They're empowered to do it. That's a great example. I guess I do have one last question for you, which is about, if you have an organization where maybe in the past creativity has not been actively encouraged, or maybe it's even been discouraged, how can you start to turn that situation around? Do you have any suggestions about, especially maybe employees might be resistant to even trying to be creative because they've been burned in the past, how to kind of turn that organizational culture around?
That's another $1 million question.
Right. That could be its own podcast, I'm well aware. Yeah.
It's not as severe as when trust is broken. It takes a long time to build back trust.
Right.
But we're talking about a culture rather than a one-time thing. And So when you're infusing culture, if you listen to our last podcast about ethics, if you're infusing culture, you want to be it, you want to do it, you want to exude it, and doing things like being excited about a new creative opportunity, having creative energy yourself, giving positive reinforcement every time someone tries something just a little different. And those kinds of things, when they start to permeate the work group or the task force or the organization, can be very useful. Another thing that can be useful is to actually create a task force and set them aside and say, we want you to think differently about this topic. And we don't want you to solve it the way we solved it in the past. We want you to come up with new ideas. And don't come out of the room until you come up with one. That's a joke. But sometimes, but then when they have the idea, I call it sponsorship. Sometimes the leader needs to say, "Oh, it's not what I would have come up with, but I'm going to go with it anyway."
Right.
I don't know if you're a dog person, Doug. I am, but when you tell your kids they can name the dog,
yes,
and the dog is Jack Russell, and they want to call him Jack,
right.
You don't change it.
Right.
Because if you say that's not good enough, then the next time they won't
name the dog.
Get into naming the dog.
Right.
It's the same kind of thing, kind of on a family scale. And I'm not saying if anyone out there has a dog named Jack, I'm not saying anything.
Right. We're not saying that's not a fine name. But the idea is within the organization, what you need to start to do is, it sounds like, start walking the talk, start demonstrating that you are actually allowing people. It goes back to the thing you said about positive focus. That as people see, wow, it really is being encouraged and it's safe and it's okay to do this, that they'll start to do it. But I would imagine that it takes time.
Exactly. And as simple as someone coming in with, hey, I have a new idea, instead of saying, well, we tried that a year ago and it didn't work, but thank you for coming to me. Accept the idea and say, just ask more questions. Well, how do you think it'll work? One of the best creativity killers is to say, we tried it last year and it didn't work.
Right.
Or that won't work. I've thought of it already and it won't work. Delving deeper into it, because the situation could be different. Even though it didn't work 2 years ago, there may be different factors out there that have changed, and now that idea might work. So asking more questions and validating the fact that someone actually thought about work as they were driving into work instead of thinking about something else, we want to reward that.
Right. So this is great. Again, my guest has been Marsha Egan from the Egan Group. Great stuff to think about promoting a culture of creativity. And again, I want to encourage people to go back, that you did write an article, in fact, a great article about promoting culture creativity. You've got all kinds of other great stuff on there, as well as your podcast, which I know is available on iTunes, as well as on your website. And again, let's give them that link if they want to go and learn more about you. Where can they go?
My website is MarshaEgan.com, MarshaEgan.com. And my podcast is called Great Points, because I live on Nantucket, and one of our lighthouses is called the Great Point Lighthouse. So there are two versions of what we've just been talking about. So I hope that you can access one or both of those in the future.
Marsha Egan, thank you so much for joining me and making some great points.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Thanks, everyone.
Direct your podcast questions to iask@soyteam.com. Share this podcast with your friends and remember to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode.
As always, thanks for joining us. And please remember, we'll be answering this week's podcast questions at Spot On Insurance Facebook Live, Fridays at 11 a.m. Eastern.